The views and opinions on Where Did the Road Go belong to those making them. Do not mistake allowing freedom of speech for agreement. This month's Where Did the Road Go is brought to you by 7 amazing individuals. Greg Ross, Bill Illuminati, Allison Cook, No One, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, and Michael Frisky. Thank you all for helping to make this show possible. And if you'd like to help out, become a patron at wheredidtheroadgo.com. It's only $3 a month for lots of extra content.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight I have with me Tillie Treadwell. Back again. Hello.
Hello, I'm back in black and happy to be here, my friend.
And you have, since the last time you were on, been published in a book of, it's kind of like essays, right?
Yeah, you could absolutely say that. You could call it essays, you could call them chapters. Some people might even liken them to sonnets.
Okay. It's called Weird Time, and you did 3 chapters in here, right?
I do believe so, yes. And there are lots of other chapters by my wonderful co-authors over at Zontar Press. It, I think, is a great read, and my friends, you might want to check it out if you're into deep science and freaky time stories, and we even get into homemade time machines.
Yeah, this is a lengthy book. It's what does it say here? 313 pages. Well, no, 331 pages. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a brick. You could certainly commit a felony with it if you are determined enough.
And so the main authors listed are Tim Swartz and Sean Castile.
Mm-hmm. Sean Castile, you got it.
Excellent. And anything you want to say about them?
I love them. Tim Swartz is my buddy. He helped me start up The Weird Walk Home. That is my channel on YouTube, guys. You might want to go see it for yourself. I have a bunch of new content coming soon, plus brand new tarot card readings each month. So Tim, I couldn't have done it without him. He is the co-owner of The Weird Walk Home and all of the other ventures that I'm getting into these days. So we work a lot together, and I would say that we're pretty good friends. And Sean Castile, I do get to occasionally work with him on certain projects, and I think that he is a brilliant editor and proofreader. Also, we couldn't have done this without him, so he deserves all the love in the world, I think. That's what I have to say about those two guys.
All right. And the subtitle of this is Exploring the Mysteries of Space and Time. You want to talk about what you wrote? I mean, some of it you talked about on here before, some of your experiences, but we can go over those again if you want.
I'm more than happy to talk about just about whatever you please. I know that I wrote a lot in that book, so if you could be quite so kind as to give me some little tidbits here and there to talk about, that would help me out a lot. The
first one, I think your first chapter is called Bubbles of Reality.
Yes.
And you talk about your view of what's happening, because you talk about an experience with your husband where he was supposed to go get a container of stuff, and he said it wasn't there, and then you went out there and it was there, and you said this is something that's happened before. Mm-hmm. So you want to get into that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, there have been several occasions where my husband and I were either looking for something together or separately, and it could not be found. And then a short while later, we would find it. And in one case, as discussed in the book, there were boxes of jars that I desperately needed him to bring in for me because they were just too heavy for me. I mean, you guys don't see me, but I'm like 5'3" and I'm pretty feminine, so I don't have a ton of muscle. I needed his help. He told me he was going to do it. He returned fruitlessly, and I was very frustrated because I knew that the boxes of jars were there. And he swore up and down that they were not. And when I went out there later on to check, I found lots and lots of boxes of jars. And one of them was just sitting there at eye level when I opened the door, with the little flaps of the box all thrown open, and I could clearly see the jars glinting in the Florida sunlight. And I was so mad. And he swore up and down that they had not been there. And I was stressed out because I was getting ready for an event. So it was a mess. And later on, I witnessed my cat coming out of pavement that was years dried. There was no way, quote unquote, that this could have happened, but I saw it with my own eyes. And it was one of the strangest experiences I've ever had in my life to this day. So I apologized to him and said that from now on, I would believe him that something had just appeared. And I had seen similar things happen before. He and I had had these experiences before, but it was a lot of jars and boxes that were missing. So I just thought that he was trying to get out of doing the work, But when I saw my cat coming out of the pavement, I decided that he probably was not dying on this hill. He was probably telling me the truth.
How do you connect these two things, though?
Sure. So I have a theory that we or I or whoever is experiencing the materializing items, or in my case, animals, are switching timelines, essentially. And we're popping into a parallel or a dissecting timeline, and we are witnessing the crossover of the two timelines, essentially manifesting in the appearance or sometimes even the disappearance of items. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the only clue that we might be changing timelines could be, in my theory, that an item or items are appearing or disappearing right then and there before our eyes or right behind our backs. And so in the Mandella Effect, people will often claim that they had a very favorite item, for example, and that after their near-death experience or after the really weird day that they had that one time, they came home and that towel, which was like red before, is now blue or green or gray. And they know for a fact that it was not that way before. Stuff like that. And so why then would an item randomly change in that manner? And then they start to notice other things changing too, perhaps, like the supposed factual flow of certain political events or relationship events. Those seem to have changed as well. And I think that all of these are possibly due to timeline shifting.
I think it's
what do you think, though?
I definitely think it's a possibility. It brings up the question of whether or not there are other timelines, of course, because we can't prove it one way or the other, unfortunately.
Isn't that the $1 million question, though?
Yeah. I mean, in Jane Roberts' Seth materials, he would say the same thing, that you're shifting timelines, that you can retro, and that you can affect things not only in the future, but in the past.
And that's my theory, and that also seems to be my experience. My husband's as well, because we've each had a few memory experiences where we seem to have dual memories of completely opposite things.
So how do you know you're not just remembering wrong?
I would like to say that it is because these were really significant events and we don't have dementia.
Well, okay. So the reason I asked that is because in The Invisible Gorilla, the book two psychologists wrote about how we perceive reality and such, one of the things they tested was memory. And this was written, I think they published it in like 2009. And they talk about how very significant events stand out much more in our memory than less significant events. So what they used is 9/11, and they had cameras in the college they were working at, and they had the footage from that day of the classrooms and what the people were doing in those rooms and such. And they asked those people, what happened when you heard about 9/11? And every single person was absolutely sure they completely remembered this in detail because it was such a strong memory. When they looked at the video footage, every single person was wrong to some degree.
I'm not going to say that this isn't possible. It was just interesting because it's happened to us a few times for some very significant events, and our dual memories were exactly the same, both sets of memories, without having discussed it beforehand. So that's why, for me, I lean to thinking that this is something more quantum, and we were each experiencing a different reality bubble with each other. But of course, I'm never going to say like, oh, this is 100% what happened. There's no chance that I can't be mistaken or having some undiagnosed mental issue, anything like that, because it's always just a possibility, flat out.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something we know happens. Memory is not by any means perfect.
Yes.
I know mine isn't. I'm often, although writing stuff down, like actual handwriting stuff down, apparently helps people remember things. Like not as much typing, but actually writing. And I don't ever do that anymore.
No.
But there were events that, like the night I was given the name Seriah, what confused me about it is that my memory of it was driving past the person's house who was in the seat next to me. And I was like, why would we be passing her house? That doesn't make any sense. I must be remembering wrong. So when I finally found the entry on it when I was working on my autobiography, I realized that she had come here to my house, which is past her house, and then we got picked up by a friend and went to the concert with him. So her car was still at my house. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, my memory was right. And it makes sense. Okay, great. In the incident where we had a tree shake that only 2 of the 3 of us saw, I remembered it logically as being the other person seeing it being the person who experienced other stuff with me, just by default, because he had been around for so many other weird things. I'm like, well, it must have been Dave that saw the tree shaking. And when I looked at my notes, I went, oh, Dave was the one that didn't see the tree shaking. That's actually weirder now.
Oh, no.
But there's 3 of us standing there, and 2 of us are seeing this tree shaking viciously, feeling these loud thumps on the ground. He doesn't see anything.
Mm-hmm. I found in all of my years of paranormal counseling and paranormal investigating that this is actually rather common, believe it or not.
It's. I mean, I walked away from it realizing that we do not perceive the same reality.
Yes, and this is what reality bubbles is about in my book.
Yeah.
With my co-authors. Mm-hmm.
And that it does make sense. It does. I mean, there's also, on top of that, you also got Apports, and I know you're familiar with Steve Mira's work.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, there's the possibility of Apports, not just. Although the jars missing would be a big Apport.
Mm-hmm. I don't believe necessarily that these would fit classically and neatly into what Steve would call Apports.
I don't either.
I'm not so sure. Yeah, I'm not so sure then what to call them in this instance. And I've been trying to come up with a name now for months. So if anyone has any good ideas, please let us know.
The fact that that's happened more than once is odd too.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to hear another story about it?
Absolutely.
Okay. So my husband and I, our last place of residence was this charming, cute little cottage. And when we were moving in, we were unpacking, of course, the U-Haul, and we needed to find all of the kitchen utensils and, in general, the kitchenwares as a top priority. We unloaded everything. We started looking through for all of these items, all of these bins, could not find them whatsoever. We found then all but the last big one. And we went through every single bin. We went through the U-Haul again, which was completely empty. So we were 100% sure that somehow we must have left it somewhere, but then we were talking about it and we had made triple sure that we didn't leave it. And while we were standing in the kitchen talking, I had my back to the kitchen doorway and my husband was standing looking directly into my face just a few feet away. All of a sudden, I went to take a step back to turn around and go back out to the U-Haul just in case, because I was starting to feel kind of crazy. And I tripped over the massive bin that we were looking for. It was blocking the doorway. There was no way that it had not been there because the kitchen was brand new and empty otherwise. And we were both absolutely flabbergasted.
And that does sound like an Apport, because they tend to show up, something will disappear and then show up in a place that it couldn't have been.
Yes, I agree. It is generally an apport. I just think that it needs to have perhaps its own distinction for cases like this versus for maybe poltergeist-like activity, the way that Steve Mera typically investigates, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I suspect, though, you generate a lot of very odd energy, and that might be what's powering it.
Oh, don't go telling all my secrets. Don't kiss and tell now, love. But would you elaborate? I'm curious as to what you have to say.
Well, because when we talk poltergeist, most people are thinking noisy ghost or whatever, and I don't use poltergeist as a ghost. To me, poltergeist is spontaneous psychokinetic energy. So I think it's something that exists around us in certain places. I think it's something that we can emit ourselves, even if we don't really have very good control of it. There are people who seem to have better control of it. So it's something that's a part of the natural environment, and in some places it's stronger, in some places it's weaker. It manifests in us, especially in people who have had a lot of trauma, who are going through emotional stuff, in liminal places. I mean, there's a lot of different things that can cause this psychokinetic energy to build up. So the fact that you were moving and this thing disappeared, it could, whatever the disappearance could have been unconscious, like you could have caused it to disappear and caused it to reappear later, or something there could have used your energy to make it disappear and reappear, in a trickstery sort of way, putting it right in your path.
That is true. And I don't know what causes these types of events in my life, although for some cases, sure, I have my suspicions. I think that, again, there need to be more distinctions between the classes of activity and therefore their attributed causes. So I wouldn't call this type of activity necessarily poltergeist because it didn't seem like there was anything intelligent behind it. That's why I think that it's more of a timeline shift, for example.
And it certainly could be. I'm not saying that I'm right about this. I'm just giving it another possibility of what could cause something like that.
Gotcha. I don't necessarily disagree with you at all. I just wish this is one of the cases where I wish I had some answers, to be honest.
One of the interesting things that I've mentioned this numerous times. The last time I had Steve Mera on, he was talking about an apport of a mug in a place they were investigating. Yeah. And so they couldn't find the mug, and suddenly it appeared right in the middle of like the floor. Yeah. And he picked up the mug, and they put an EMF reader on it on the floor where it appeared, and there was a slight EMF field that decayed pretty quickly. And then he asked the woman, "Do you have another one of these mugs?" And she's like, "Yeah, it was a 4-pack." And he's like, "Great, could I have, another mug?" So he took them both to a lab and had them analyzed. And he said the mug that apported is not the same mug.
Correct.
So that being the case, this thing has, if it could have come from a different timeline. It could have, in the dematerialization and rematerialization, it didn't just slip into another reality and come back. It was different on an atomic level. Right. Which gives us some piece of information. And you see the same stuff in certain UFO cases where they find slag and stuff like that. One of the problems with it that they don't understand is that the stuff is not necessarily stuff we don't find on Earth, but it's put together in a configuration we do not see any reason to have ever made. Mm-hmm. With Steve's investigations and long-term fascination with these matters, I truly wouldn't be surprised if there are people on the other side of the veil who are kind of playing a game of cat and mouse with him in a sense and snagging items occasionally, making copies of them, and then sending back the copy and keeping the original. I mean, I could see a lot of reasons why these other people would want to do that potentially, but then it also could be a timeline shift, or it could be a subconscious manifestation of psychokinetic ability. There are so many things to it, but I do agree that there's a major difference, at least scientifically, when these items are being sent back. And I wondered a lot, too, in my book, when I witnessed my cat coming out of the cement, was this actually the same cat that I had before? And what about me? Am I the same Tillie that as before? Or what is all of this? Don't you just love a good mystery? I do. Every cell in your body, I believe, has changed within 8 or 9 years. Mm-hmm. And those cells make up who you physically are, and you're not the same person you were 10 years ago.
True.
So the only thing really holding us together is consciousness.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. And then what exactly is consciousness? What is sentience? I think that there are many different gradations of that and many different, you could say, opinions about what that is or is not.
Yeah.
It gets to be a very philosophical discussion, in my opinion.
Well, sure. And, other creatures perceive things differently than we do. Because pretty much everything in this world is built for survival, including us.
Yeah.
Which is why we react to certain things that, even though it doesn't really serve us in the same way because of our civilization, we still have similar reactions to certain things that are there strictly for survival.
You cannot tell me that is true about the tourists who go and try to pet the bison at Yellowstone.
Oh, well, there's a Darwin Award out there for those people. And so, I mean, it's what I'm saying, though, is that the way the brain perceives things is primarily based on survival. So it filters out the things that it doesn't think are important to survival. Now, stupidity can overcome that easily. Hence, people who think they can pet the bison or the lion or whatever and be fine, not really thinking about the consequences of what could happen to them.
Right. I'm a little ashamed because there was a gentleman out in the world. His name was Tillie Treadwell. If anyone's ever heard of him, he thought that he could tame bears, and that didn't go well. So the human psyche is fascinating to me.
Were you related to this Tillie Treadwell?
Oh, thank goodness. Oh.
So there are obviously there are people who can train bears. There are people who can train lions, but in the end, those creatures are still driven by certain impulses, just like we are. And it takes conscious effort to get past those impulses and override them and understand that they're there in the first place.
Oh, 100%. And so the way that I see this is that integrity is the beginning of love, and consideration is the beginning of integrity. And I think that when people can become more aware of their survival instincts, their biases, their emotional states, even their hormonal and chemical states, I think that that's where people can begin to have consideration for themselves, truly, and then also for other people and for animals and for essentially the universe around themselves. And that is the beginning of free will. And I think that maybe one day humanity will get there, and I hope that will become more and more of a focus over time. Because, the survival instincts, I think that they're wonderful for getting away from that bear or that lion or that bison if you didn't at first, provoke it. But they're not so great for example, meeting other types of peoples out there who might be non-human, have a different look about them and different psychology. And it's also not great for scientific studies, It requires a lot of objectivity. And I hope that with more awareness can come more civility.
I think that is one of the bigger issues dealing with the paranormal, is that we want to assign familiar things to them.
Yeah, I agree.
So you're interacting with something that may have never been human, but we expect it to act like human. Even in sci-fi, a lot of times, the aliens, their motivations and stuff are basically human motivations. It takes pretty good writers and thinkers to come up with things that are not based on our own personal biases and the way we look at the world.
100%. And I think that this is one of the big reasons why a lot of non-human people, whether they live here full-time, part-time, or they can just visit, why they don't even bother with humankind, because, well, then this gets into the Pygmalion delusion as well. So human beings might see or interact with someone that seems really friendly and sweet, or who just does not have the ability to respond in a way that a human being can essentially code. And so they will assume that that person aligns with them psychologically, morally, etc. And then there's a big issue if that person doesn't. So why would other peoples want to interact directly with this species? It just makes sense for them to just snag a mug here and there and observe from afar then, doesn't it?
Why don't you explain to people what you mean by non-human?
Absolutely. When I am saying non-human, it can be a few different things, just depending upon the context of the discussion. So here in this discussion, what I am meaning is any person or creature or being, depending upon the level of sentience generally, that either contains a non-human psychology and or non-human genetics. So it could be a hybrid person, for example, who does not have the human psychology. They have an exotic psychology. Or it could be someone who is just completely non-human and their DNA would reflect that. Does that help?
Yeah, sure. Although I don't think we've ever seen non-human DNA in anybody. I'm not saying it's not out there, but I'm just saying, there are people who claim to be hybrids, but their DNA does not reflect anything but human.
Right. And I think that there are people out and about just generally who they might be able to chameleon their DNA so that it vibrates and looks the very same as human DNA under the microscope. But if you were to examine it down in the quantum level, you might find those differences. That's just my theory, though. I have no proof. Remember, guys, I could be crazy. I could be mistaken. So please think for yourself. Because right now I just started a brand new medicine for some health stuff that I have going on. I have 2 brain cells and they're both fighting for 3rd place. So please pardon me.
They're fighting for 3rd place. That's nice.
I thought you might like that.
What was I going to say? It's also possible that there's things, and I've talked about this plenty of times in the past, things that look perfectly normal to us that are not. There's plenty of reports, like John Keel, talks about a report of someone seeing an airplane, except the airplane looked like a normal airplane, but it was moving way too slow. It was making no noise, and it was just slowly moving around like this windmill or whatever, and he's like, that's not an airplane, but for all intents and purposes, it looked like an airplane. There are people who have had experiences where they've seen airplanes standing still in the air. And again, what do you do with that? It looks like an airplane. So it's entirely possible someone you pass on the street is not human in the same sense that the general population is, but they're also not going to go to a doctor and get tested. They're trying to hide among us. And they may not even be a solid apparition. You may not know unless you touch them.
Yeah. And this is a big part of the message that I bring because I seem to have had a lot of experiences with non-human peoples all throughout my life since I was a baby in the baby carrier. And I feel like I'm just here to hopefully encourage more harmony and less tribalism in humankind, if that's what people here want. So learning to be more objective, learning how to control that tribalism and the judgmentality, learning how to develop humility and just be open-minded, I think that would go a long way. And I think also that is crucial for aiding scientific study because there are many wondrous things that I am certain lots of non-human people know and understand that they would love to share with humankind, to welcome them essentially into the greater family. But human beings tend to be extremely violent and biased. So why would they want to welcome that into their realm, into their family? And I wouldn't want to share scientific discoveries with people like that either, personally. But a lot of human beings think, oh, something is only good if it aligns with what I believe, it makes me feel good, and if I can defend it with my opinion, if I don't have to essentially prove it factually. And I don't like that. So in a lot of ways, I offer a disagreeing opinion, but it's in a very loving way, at least as much as I can understand. But some people hate my guts, so I don't know.
Well, not everyone's going to like anyone. I mean, that's a thing. There was something that was right on the tip of my tongue, and my 2 brain cells apparently are not cooperating at the moment either. Well, part of the problem is tribalism is driven very much by capitalist culture, because they make money off of it. So,
True.
you have sports invested in so heavily, and you're not even supposed to like people who don't like your team, you know? It's taking advantage of that tribalism instinct. You see it with everything nowadays. Everything, it's like, you know, it's this versus that, or this versus that. You have to be this side or that side. You can't just like both of them.
False dichotomy is that's what that's called.
Yeah. But it makes money because it invests people more in supporting their side, you know, the thing they like. And so it's very hard to beat tribalism. Oh, I know what I was going to say. The other thing is that things like violence seem to be hardwired into our brains. It's something we have to actively work to get through. So I don't know if we're ever going to be welcomed into anything bigger so much as that this is someplace we learn.
Yeah.
You know,
I agree with that.
I feel like this stuff regularly presents itself a certain way, just to the point where people are like, I think we got it figured out, and then it changes.
Right. And, you know, I think that there might be certain human exceptions, chosen humans amongst the population who maybe get to learn more. And maybe that's because they don't possess the same nature as their brethren around them. But aside from that, I've kind of given up on humanity as a whole. And I've recently learned to embrace exactly what you've just put forth, that this is more of a place to learn, and that maybe, you know, there is reason for the trickster element. And now at this point, I'm just here to collect stories and offer hope to people who actually want to hear what I have to say.
And the way you describe, you know, people who might tap into this stuff better would describe someone like Tesla. Yeah. I think he was really onto something when he was speaking about the secrets of the universe being held in frequency and vibration. Yes, absolutely. And he never really tried to monetize his stuff. He wanted to share it with the world.
Sure.
So, I mean, and when they had him developing a death ray, he realized what they wanted to do with it. And he's like, no, I'm not going to build this. You know, that's the ideal there. You know, someone who is actually altruistic, genuinely altruistic. I mean, he never made money off of all these inventions, but we're using a lot of his, the stuff he discovered in our technology today. And we don't even understand some of the stuff he was able to do.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I love his spirit from what I seem to be able to understand. But my question always comes back to this. Does humanity really deserve it? For me, the answer is no. It's a resounding no. But I think that he was a rare soul, and I'm glad that he made the contributions that he has, because I like things like Wi-Fi. So I don't know.
Yes, yeah. I don't want to go back to a hunter-gatherer society. I think our civilization would be okay if we learn to not overuse things. Like there is a balance that we don't have, and that's the problem.
Oh, absolutely. Oh my gosh, what was his name? There was a book series. Oh, that's right. Scott Westerfeld. He wrote a book series about human nature that I still today occasionally will read because I regard it as being that important and brilliant. It was called the Uglies series. And he talks about moderation and humans' ability to moderate itself, or, you know, essentially not, and potential solutions. I think that should be required reading personally. Of course, I'm not for government. I'm just saying, like, personally, I think it needs to be required reading for every individual who is looking to gain free will and genuine self-awareness, at least as I understand it. I'm sorry, bud.
I mean, realistically, we live in a culture where we are intentionally, you know, these companies make things that are obsolete, you know, like batteries that will slow down. I mean, lithium-ion batteries are a horrible thing, and we all use them because it's the only, because everything uses them. You don't have the option of, I'm going to get that phone that doesn't have the lithium-ion battery. But, you know, they're hurting children who are mining some of the stuff that they make the batteries out of. In Africa, they are absolutely terrible for the environment. They don't break down.
Right.
But yet these companies make them so that you have to get a new phone or a new device every few years because that's how they make their money. It's this idea of exponential growth that doesn't stop, and it's not realistic. and it's destroying everything. So
I agree with you all the way. And because of things like this, there is no one ever in existence who will be able to convince me that human beings are by and large, the good guys.
yeah, well, but when you look at it, it's the people in control, and they're the people with money. It doesn't matter where they are. It's the people with the money, the people with the power, because money brings power. There are plenty of good people out there. But when you look at the bigger picture, it's going to be, there was a story I read about a guy who, his grandfather, I think it was, owned a restaurant that was very successful. And he asked his grandfather why he didn't expand it, because he easily could have. He could have made this a bigger restaurant. He could have opened other things. And his grandfather said, look, I'm living comfortably. I can provide for my family. He's like, the bigger it gets, the harder it is not to be standing on the backs of the people working for you.
True.
His son said, or his grandson said, that they had almost no turnover in employees. People worked there and continued to work there because they were happy, they were paid well. But at a certain point, places get so big that gets lost. And that's why he never made the place bigger, because he wasn't greedy about it. He wasn't like, oh, I could make, it's going to hurt my workers, but I could do this. He never did that.
And I think that that's beautiful, and I'm sure that cases like this exist, but even as you yourself said just a few moments ago, that violence seems to be part of the genetic code for human beings, and I agree. And this is why I say that aside from certain exceptions, no one can convince me that human beings are the good guys. And you were talking about the rich people being the so-called bad guys here. I agree with that, but I've also met probably thousands now of middle income or very low income people who have done heinous things.
Sure.
And so I don't know. If I could vote Meteor 2024, I probably would.
The thing about, and it's not necessarily that I think rich people are bad people. I think a lot of times they're just very detached, because they're entitled and they don't understand what it means to want for anything.
And I will agree with that. Yes.
And that creates a worldview that is much different than the person who's living paycheck to paycheck, or is barely, or maybe not even able to pay their bills. And so they don't grasp that. It's like a completely foreign concept to them, because they've never had to do that. Money doesn't actually mean survival to them. It means power.
I'm not going to disagree with you there, because I think you're right in a lot of ways for a lot of these people. And I think the biggest trifle that I have with human beings is it's just seemingly a constant grapple for power between people. Does that make sense? Like, no matter how rich, no matter how poor, it just seems to be a constant power struggle. I find that exhausting.
I always, one of my favorite books, and I've quoted this before, is Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land. You've read it?
No, but you recommended it. You told me what it was about, and I need to at some point.
Well, it's the revelation. This kid has grown up on Mars, and he gets brought back to Earth, and he does not understand people, because Martians were so completely different. Their culture was so completely different. He doesn't get it. And one day they're at the zoo, and he sees, like one monkey steal the next monkey's banana, and then a bigger monkey comes along and steals his banana. And he suddenly realizes this explains humans, and he just can't stop laughing, because it's so simple that the whole book here, he is trying to understand why humans behave the way he is, or why they do. And here in the monkey cage was the basic, problem right there.
Yeah, I agree. So I think that if people would work together and love each other a lot more, love each other as they love themselves, if they were truly having healthy love for themselves anyways, I think that this world's problems would be able to disappear in a snap.
There was a series I watched, which I recommend, called Counterpart. And it was a 2-season series about the sudden split between our world and another world. So at some point, a doorway forms, and those timelines now diverge. Mm-hmm. And they can cross back and forth. And I'm thinking, man, imagine the stuff that you could do if you had twice the brains to work out problems. Because, our side is developing cell phones and stuff, but the other side is developing better medical stuff. And I'm thinking, this would be a great opportunity to really kind of expand what we can do. And then I'm thinking, wait, we don't do that now. And we have all these different countries that if we work together, we could, because in the series, it's basically a Cold War between these two universes. And I'm like, why wouldn't you work together? And I'm like, right, because it's people and we don't work together, even when it's like copies of us, basically.
Yep. And there you have it. And this is why aliens fly by and lock their doors.
So the next chapter in this book that you wrote was called The Pretzel Logic of Time. And clearly you like the Men in Black series. I
think you might be onto something. I might have watched the movies for a little bit. Yeah.
I liked them at the time, but I haven't seen them in so long. Like you're quoting dialogue and talking about something like I don't remember any of this. I could probably watch them like I'd never seen them before.
Well, then you can watch them from the scientific point of view, and it might be even more fun.
I mean, I remember the thing where they erased people's memories.
Yes, the neuralizer.
Yeah, I do know there was a Men in Black International that I never watched because I think everyone told me it was terrible.
Yes.
So
same. I never watched it either.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I refused.
I know a lot of people didn't like the third one, and you talk about the time travel aspects of the third one. I think I liked the third one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I really loved all three, but the third I think was, I want to say it was almost my favorite. I don't know. I'd have to rewatch them all again to force myself to make a choice. Yeah.
So what did you take out of this to put in this chapter? Concept here.
Huh?
The concept here.
The concept. Oh, my bad. Well, there were a few different ways that I wanted to come at this chapter, and if you're able to read it, you'll understand what I'm getting at. That's why it was called the Pretzel Logic of Time. So I don't want to complicate things too terribly much. But essentially, I was talking about how there might be people out there, much like depicted in the Men in Black 3 movie, who are able to hop timelines, view different timelines, and make distinctions real time between them. And I thought that concept was crucial scientifically because although it's depicted in a fun, lighthearted way for the movie plot, I think that scientifically it is incredibly valid. And I go into a lot within that chapter. I don't want to spoil it for you, but that's the gist of it.
The way you describe it is like these characters can see probabilities.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've sort of been able to do, not like crystal clear. And I didn't know how to describe it until I was watching Andromeda, which was one of those shows that was a Gene Roddenberry show, but it really wasn't because he was dead by then. And he had just kind of like written up a premise and then somebody else wrote the show.
Oh, wow.
It's a mixed bag. Like the stuff that's good is really good. The stuff that's not good is pretty bad because they kept switching showrunners and writers. And so like they would have arc storylines that would just stop because they changed showrunners or they changed writers. And it was like, what is going on with this series? But one of the characters, which I'm going to give him a mild spoiler of, turns out to be the avatar of a sun. So she's the consciousness of a sun, which you don't know this. She's actually really annoying at the very beginning of the series, and then she becomes very interesting because you realize that she has this sort of dark side. But she has one of those bonsai trees. Mm-hmm. And she keeps cutting off different branches. And finally, when someone asks her, why do you keep cutting off the branches? She's like, this is our future. She's like, and every time we make a decision, we're losing some of these probabilities. She's like, and this is just my way of visualizing it here.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that probabilities and timelines are types of language that other kinds of people are able to use and understand. And then that is a type of telepathy as well. At least that's my understanding of it. I hope that makes sense, and that's why the Men in Black movie was so important to me. I'm really happy to hear about these other shows where that's presented too, in a way anyway.
Because when I saw that, I'm like, that's kind of I don't know how to describe it accurately. Like I will, even if little things like, okay, I need to go to the store. Well, I have two cities that are equidistant away from me, north and south. And so if there's not a particular, sometimes I need something in one that's not in the other. But sometimes I'll be like, okay, I just need to grab a few things at the store. I can go either way. And I kind of just reach my mind out to determine which one I'm supposed to go to.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like I can feel probable, or like, the other night, when we recorded my music show, The Last Exit, I wasn't sure if my one co-host was going to show up. And I kind of reached out and I said, yeah, he's going to show up. He's going to be able to do it. And other times I know they won't. And it's not, it is sort of a version of telepathy, but it feels like there's a probability there. It's like, I'm pretty sure he's going to show up, but there's a small probability he won't. And then he showed up. And I'm like, okay, good. We hit that probability.
Yeah. And I think that if people can begin to contemplate probabilities and quantum consequences a little bit more, that this could result in more human free will development. And I think also that's great for scientific study. So I'm all for it. And it sounds like you're able to tap into that in a sense, at least in my understanding. So that's pretty cool, I think.
It's a sense of, because it resonated with me when she was talking about the bonsai trade, like seeing less probabilities. And I'm like, oh, yeah. No, I feel that. I get that. But I didn't really think of it that way until I saw that. So, and I'm saying all this at the same time, I'm not sure we have free will. This is the thing. Like I simultaneously believe that, yes, we have free will and multiple universes and all this, and simultaneously feel like we may not have free will, that we're just basically actors in a play.
Sure. The way that I see it is that there are different levels of free will and consciousness. I believe that the average human being doesn't have free will except in certain instances that shake up both the subconscious and the conscious mind. And I think that those are orchestrated from, you could say, beyond the veil. So orchestrated from the soul level, the home level. And then I think that the souls behind the human avatars have an immense degree of free will, and that all of this is planned out anyways, even the parts where there is no free will. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. I don't sound crazy yet, huh?
So you're talking like our higher selves when you're saying like soul avatars.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think we very well, and this brings time into the equation too, because if you're standing outside of time, time's not really a factor. It's like, I mean, because I always describe it as like having a book or a video game where everything that's going to happen is there. I mean, a video game is probably a better example because there is some, no matter what game you're playing, even if it's a straight narrative type of game, you still have some variation in what you can do as you go through it, even though you're going to end up in the same spot if you finish the game. But all those choices and everything in that game is on that code. Right. So
yeah, I see it very similarly.
Yeah. So, I mean, you do have some free will in the game, but at the same time, you're still going to end up in the same place. Whereas with a book, you're going to end up in the same place. You don't have any free will. But you can hold that whole book in your hand and still not know anything about it because you need to be reading the book, aka going through time, to process it.
Yeah. I think that there are some lifetimes where for someone it is more like a book. And then I think that there are other ones where it is a lot more like an interactive video game. And I think that this depends on a combination of a person's genetics as well as the plan from before the person got to the incarnate destination. And it might be affected also by the choices of others around that so-called main character.
Yeah.
And I think that there are an unlimited amount of timelines and possibilities. So I think that they are all grouped up together in similar clusters. And I think that people flow freely between them, how the incarnation is turning out in any general given timeline, if that kind of vibes a little bit. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jane Roberts Seth once made the comment that time passes at the speed that your consciousness can process reality. And
I think that that's very fair. What do you think?
Yeah, I thought it was amazing because, I mean, when you think about it, when you're really busy or you're really having a lot of fun, time flies. But if you're just sitting there bored, time just creeps along. And it's like, so it's kind of like having a computer processor where, the more stuff it's doing, the more time seems like it's flying. Like time is kind of the thing that that affects the processing speed.
I think that's a fair analogy, yeah.
Our brains can handle up to this much processing. If you're only giving it a quarter of that, then the brain's going, well, I'll just slow down now. And that's how we experience time slower.
Yeah. And who's to say that that's wrong objectively? I think that sometimes time really does slow down for a person in the whole objective timeline. Meanwhile, everyone else might be aging more quickly on the cellular level, and maybe it is just because of the subjective experience influencing how the flow of the timeline is going for them.
Yeah, and I think too with things like aging, I think people's belief about aging has a lot to do with how people age. Because I know people who, when they turn 25 or 26, were like, "Oh, I'm old."
Oh my gosh!
And it's like, what? You know. And at the same time, I know I have a computer customer who is, I think she said 92. She is very sharp, very funny. She recently broke her back lifting weights because she lifted weights that were too heavy for her bones. And she still darts around her apartment and apologizes for being so slow. And it's like, you're faster than most people I know. This is ridiculous. Like, I love going to see her. Like, she said something like about how she's crazy. And I'm like, are you kidding? You're my role model.
Oh my God. I would love to be like her if I ever make it to that age. Oh my goodness.
That's the thing. Like, I'm like, if I make it to 92 and I'm like you, I've succeeded. Like
100%. I agree.
She's enjoying her life. She dances. She does all the, I'm like, yeah. And then I know people who are like 50 who are like, I can barely move, you know? It's like,
yes.
And some of that, of course, is going to be wear and tear from, you know, what you've done with your life and stuff like that. And some of it's genetics, but I think also a lot of it is attitude.
I agree. And I think that there are lots and lots of timelines out there where these things don't matter. And it's more dependent upon someone's attitude or personal vibration entirely.
Yeah, yeah. We got to take a quick break. We'll be right back. A recommendation. First of all, contact info. Everything can be found at wheretdtheroadgo.com. And the entire website has been redone, overhauled by Mr. John Tudor, who has done an amazing job. And the site looks great and works great. The search engine is greatly improved from what it was. I mean, the whole thing just looks fantastic. He did an amazing job. And yeah, go check it out. If you find any problems, let me know so I can pass them on to him. But it seems like we've gotten most of the kinks out, and it's working very, very nicely. While you're there, you know, if you want to give a donation to the show or you want to become a patron, where you can do so for just $3 a month, and you get extra content every month, and you get basically the show a week early, commercial-free. You get extra content from almost every show, and you get other things that are Patreon only. Also, if you want to see the documentary that Chris Ernst made about Where Did the Road Go? The Magicians Long to See. That is available right now only for patrons. And again, it's only $3. So you get a ton of stuff every month for just $3. If you don't want to become a patron, but you want to support the show, leave us a good review somewhere. Wherever you're listening to the show, share the show. Give us a good rating. Everything helps, and hope to be doing this for a very long time. All right. If you like heavy music, I've been doing a heavy music show for a very long time. Heavy, dark music, not just metal, but a lot of metal and a lot of other metal-adjacent stuff. It's called The Last Exit for the Lost. You can find it at thelastexit.org. And that's also a weekly show, sometimes with people who have been on this show, interestingly enough. All right, so my recommendation, I think for the first time I'm going to recommend a YouTube channel. And this is one I tend to watch most days. And although I don't necessarily agree with all the conclusions, a lot of the news articles and stuff they put up are very interesting. And they're short little, usually 2-3 minute videos every day. It's called Suspicious Observers, just one word, at suspiciousobservers.com. And it basically talks about the sun and the possibility of, magnetic pole shifts, climate change, in relation to the sun, what the sun does to us. And I don't, like I said, I can't completely condone some of the conclusions he comes to, but there's a lot of good scientific data there that if you take separate from his conclusions, are very interesting. And I'm not saying he's necessarily wrong. I mean, but I've seen conclusions like this for years that have not come to pass, like many things. But there's a lot of valuable data there, and I tend to enjoy listening to the quick little news briefs every day, and occasionally pull some pretty interesting scientific papers from it. So, decide for yourself. Suspicious Observers on YouTube. All right, back to the show. So I'm here with Tillie Treadwell, and we're talking about a book that she has contributed to called Weird Time. We're also talking about a lot of other stuff. But you talk about the chaos theory stuff with like the butterfly effect in this chapter, called the segment in the chapter called Butterflies and Unicorns. And I like that you I mean, the butterfly effect is kind of it's like Schrodinger's cat. It was never meant to be taken literally, but a lot of people take it literally, and you did not. You were like, yeah, I don't think the butterfly flapping its wings creates the typhoon, but it's more that, every little thing has an effect.
Yeah. That's my understanding. I don't think that within chaos theory, the butterfly thing is literal. It just does not make sense to my mind. But of course, I could be totally wrong. I just see it more as that, as you said, every little thing adds up towards one timeline or event or another.
Yeah, everything counts.
Everything, every single little thing. And so for me, I think that the awareness of the smallest details possible is massive when discussing concepts such as free will and quantum timelines, for example, and or even just quantum entanglement.
Yeah, and quantum entanglement is one of those things we're slowly getting more and more interesting experiments done with, but we still don't have the slightest idea why it works. Because you're talking about two particles being entangled over a distance instantly with no speed of light restrictions or anything, no matter how far apart they are. And
sure.
Go ahead.
I think that distance and time and in general appearances really are just illusions. So to me, it makes sense that there is such a thing as quantum entanglement. I don't think that it is actually two different particles being entangled. I think that they are two halves of a whole. That's my thought. That's my understanding.
Yeah, well, that's certainly a possibility. I mean, there's also the one particle theory that every particle in the universe is the same particle, just repeating back and forth through time.
I think that also could be possible. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, have you found any good evidence for that?
No.
Do you think? Okay.
But it's just something someone threw out there, just like the idea that every incarnation, every person that incarnates is you in a different life. And if you take that to a grand scale, that we're all connected, we're all part of this whatever has created us, then that's kind of true.
That is my own understanding as well. Not quite so literally, though. I think that all of incarnation is just God playing finger puppets.
Yeah. So in a sense, I mean, we are all connected.
Yeah.
And I mean, but you were talking off air. I don't know if you want to talk about this on air. About doing some past life regressions.
Oh no, that's extremely private, my dear.
Okay. All right. What did you do? However, did you do them with hypnosis?
Yeah.
Okay. And you said it helped you?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. That's interesting. Because I mean, for me, hypnosis doesn't necessarily recover memory, but I know other people who have done past life regressions with hypnosis, and it has helped them figure things out psychologically.
Yeah, it really seemed to help me. It's just like the results of it are so like private for me.
Sure, that's fine.
And humankind would absolutely, I think, want to burn me at the stake if I were completely honest about what I discovered.
So your third chapter in the book is called Strange New Worlds. And do you remember what this one was about?
To be honest, I don't remember everything right now. I put so very much into that book. And again, It's getting a little late. My brain cells are now fighting for fourth place. So if you could remind me, that'd be great.
So one of the things you talk about is scientists have discovered what is known as superposition, which we were kind of talking about, quantum entanglement. And you're talking about the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum physics, which is that reality needs to be observed to exist. And I think that is probably the case. Mm-hmm. But I also think we're probably living in something that is similar to a simulation. So just like a computer program, again, it's one of those things where the computer doesn't render the stuff that's not important. Like if it doesn't need to render the entire world. It just needs to render the part of it you're interacting with. But at the same time, that also brings to mind the question of, okay, like the problem I've always had with the Schrodinger's cat equation, which again was never meant to be taken seriously. It was actually meant as a critique of how ridiculous the observer effect is. But my question would be, wouldn't the cat observe whether it's alive or dead?
If it had any level of sentience and or free will, maybe, but I don't know.
I mean, I think everything does. That's it. That's my point. But since things...
I don't think... Oh, please continue. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say that I don't think that everything has sentience or consciousness in a self-aware manner. I really don't. So I don't see validity in that argument personally. NPCs, I do think, again, like we were discussing the theory of book and video game, I do think that some people are here as a complete NPC. And I think that there are certain chapters in every incarnation where each of us is that. So I don't know. That's my take on it. But what's yours?
I mean, that's the NPC thing is interesting because it is entirely possible and we wouldn't know.
Right.
The danger of it is that, in fact, this is part of, what book was it? It's the guy that wrote the John Dies at the End series. I think it was the most recent installment of that. There's a cult who believe that most people are NPCs and they should kill them.
Oh, yeah. How delightful.
And so, I mean, there's the danger of that type of thinking is that people will be like, well, it's okay. I'm pretty sure that person's an NPC. I can treat them however I want. Myself, I feel bad when I treat characters bad in video games, even though I know they're not conscious.
Yes.
Like, you can just kill that person. And it's like, why would I kill them? They're fine. They look happy.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And I had made a whole episode about this idea essentially early on in my YouTube career, and people might want to go check that out. It's in season 1 of my original Weird Walk Home content, and I talk about Buddhist monks and tulpas and the theory that we're all book characters or video game characters, essentially. So you might want to go see that for yourself, because I dive really deeply into that material. But who's to say, really? And this is why I don't support religion or government or anything like that for myself. And I don't think it's wise in general to support that because of this type of, again, human tribalism.
Yeah. So we had talked, was it last week's show? Might have been last week's show, which no one at the time of this recording hasn't been published yet. But Josh Saxon, Chris and I talk about an article where their scientists are now saying, it seems that animals are actually way more sentient than we give them credit for, including insects. Like one of the things they notice is that bees will play with like little balls if you give them to them. Which is obviously a sign of sentience. There was a fish, a very simple fish that they thought there's no way this thing's sentient. And they put a mirror in the tank, and the fish would initially go up and do the typical response that you would get from an instinctual thing where it thought it was a threat and kind of, got like, I'm going to fight you. And then after a while, it realized that it was looking at itself. And so it would start to do things like they said that the weirdest thing is it would flip upside down, which is not something they've ever seen that fish do before, like that species of fish. And it would watch itself in the mirror as it flipped upside down. So this implies that it had some level of sentience, that it not only recognized itself, but came up with something new to test its theory.
Yeah, and maybe that could be true sentience. I would also like to suggest that what if this was a type of NPC programmed behavior So
Also possible.
by the divine, you know?
You have these studies too on things like plant intelligence, where you can register stress reactions when other plants are being harmed around the plants that aren't being harmed, which implies some level of awareness of what's going on around them, which we don't necessarily associate with plants.
Right.
But the way
I don't know.
But the way a plant would observe the world is very different than the way we would observe the world. That's the other thing.
Sure. I think that there could be something to this, and also it could just be that the plants are having a chemical stress reaction to whatever is going on around them because the other plants are releasing certain chemicals or hormones. So for me, I can never ever know for sure whether someone or something is sentient or not, and therefore I go out of my way as much as I possibly can to simply treat every object, every animal, and every critter, human or otherwise, with as much respect as I can muster in that time.
I mean, that's a good policy.
I think so.
So you also talk in this chapter about the story I think you found on Reddit about these kids who are at McDonald's and foresaw themselves getting into a car crash.
Yes, that was indeed found on Reddit. A lot of people say that Reddit is nothing but a cesspool, but I don't know. I find some really good content there, at least by my standards.
I actually very much like Reddit. I mean, yeah, there are occasional times where I'll see really toxic stuff, but I don't know. I think I've curated my interests enough that I don't get a lot of that. And it's easy enough to just keep scrolling, too.
Yeah, that's true. I think that curation is the key with Reddit, honestly, because I've had some really good experiences with it, too, especially when it comes to collecting material and true stories. Well, allegedly true stories, anyway.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You never know, especially with Reddit. You never know if someone's just making something up, although sometimes there's telltale signs. You quote a couple of stories, but this one was interesting because they saw themselves leaving the McDonald's and getting into a car accident. And it caused them to delay a few seconds because it was something that they all sort of had a vision of.
Yes.
And then it caused them, when they got in the car, to kind of delay for a moment before taking off. And then when they took off, they just narrowly missed getting hit by a car.
Mm-hmm. I've heard so very many stories just like that. And my husband and I both seem to have experienced pretty much the same exact thing. I mean, not going to McDonald's, but generally speaking, yeah. So I think there's something to it.
So what have your experiences like with that been like?
It's basically been the same thing. We get delayed. So like my husband can't find his keys or his wallet for a moment, or I forgot something, and we have to delay the trip or the errand somewhere, and then on the way we'll pass a brand new car accident.
Okay, all right.
Or like a truck accident, a pile up, things like that. Yeah. So, has that ever happened to you?
Oh, yes. And not only that, but I used to be one of the, because I drive fast, and I used to be one of these people that if I got behind someone slow, I was like, damn it, and I would do my best to get around them. And now I've kind of taken this tack of, you know what? Unless I'm in a really desperate rush, I'm not going to do that because that person was put there to slow me down for a reason. And I've had experiences that were like, put me just in the right place at the right time that were annoying to me. For instance, I was, where was I going? Either to my friend's house or to maybe a concert in Rochester, and I get into the car and I use a Bluetooth radio connection thing. So you plug it into your lighter, it connects to your phone, and it broadcasts on a radio station, and then you turn your car to that station to get the Bluetooth.
Oh, okay. Because
my car doesn't have Bluetooth in it or any way to do that. That's how you get around that, because the radio works, so you just, it's the signal is right there, so it overwhelms any other radio signal. So it's a Bluetooth tuner. And I plug it in, I get in the car and it doesn't come on. And I unplug it and I plug it back in, it doesn't come on. I'm like, great, it's dead. I got to get another one. And I wasn't going to, so I have a Bluetooth speaker. I just grabbed that. I put that in the car. I'm driving. I realize where I put the Bluetooth speaker is blocking my dash cam. And I'm like, that's gonna be a problem, because that's just asking for something to happen. Yeah, I got a dash cam, but I couldn't see anything from it. Great, Yeah. So I'm like, okay, well, I wasn't going to stop, but I'm going to stop and at this next Walmart, and I'll get one. I was actually going to stop later on and get one. And so I stopped in this Walmart. I went back. I got the one I needed. I got up to the front, was kind of rushing, but, being patient. And when I got up to the front of the self-checkout, I went to the open register, and the woman's walking away, and she left all her money in the return slot. And it was a lot of money. It was a stack of cash. And I was like, oh, crap. And she was, still within my visual sight. So I put my cart in front of it so it wouldn't be visible. And then I ran after her, trying not to startle her. And I'm like, hey. And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, you left your money in the register. And she's like, oh my God, and she like went back and she's like thanking me. And I'm like, yep, just take your money, and then I'm like, I put the new one in, tuned it all up and everything, went to the show, got back home and went, did all that happen just so I could just give this woman her money? And so I plugged the old one back in, turned right on.
Yep. I believe you. I've had similar situations happen just generally over the course of my lifetime, though nothing with a large amount of money. And I think it's important to pay attention to those kinds of situations because within timelines and within these quantum sciences, I think that there are genuinely opportunities for all of us to become more beautiful people and to essentially become another person's guardian angel, if only for a moment.
I mean, I would like to think that anyone would have done the same thing, but I realize that's not necessarily the case. And also, I just happened to, because I was in a rush, as soon as she started to leave, I went up to the register, so I was able to turn around and see where she was.
Yes.
Had it been a couple of minutes, I would have just been like, oh, look, there's money, and I don't know who it belongs to.
Right.
I'm also really good at finding people's wallets for some reason.
Oh.
It just keeps happening to me.
Aww. You are the magical wallet keeper.
Apparently. So the other thing I wanted to bring up was is a magical practice, which I learned about. Oh man, I learned about it from a book called The Magician's Dictionary, which is an interesting book, completely out of print. And one of the things it talks about is this practice of perichoresis, which is the concept of moving between worlds. And so in it talks about the practice of being able to basically open the doorway and move to a different probable reality. And so I was like, well, this is bull. And then I tried it. And there's a number of times where distinct stuff happened when I did this. And I was like, okay, so maybe this is a thing, but also maybe not a thing I want to mess around with too much, because what if I end up in a worse probable reality? Like initially it was just kind of an experiment. And then having it work was kind of like, I got to be really careful here.
Yeah, I think that would be wise because technically, if you're switching timelines, the people around you, your loved ones, the pets, the environments, the objects, they are not the same original ones that you were used to. And that can go sideways real quick.
I mean, they're the same and they're not. But usually what I would discover were little things were different. Like it was basically the same timeline. But there's be some glaring differences. And it's like, what's okay, that's interesting. That wasn't there before, Yeah.
I do believe fully in this type of magical practice, and that's magic with a Q. I think that there's a lot to it, and I wrote about that also in the book. So I provided a few different ways for people to experiment with that if they wanted to.
And so why did you decide to use a Q?
Q stands for quantum.
And you're also differentiating it from stagehand magic, which is just normal what magic is spelled like, and then the version with the K that Crowley added to define more ceremonial type magic.
That is correct, yes. I believe that there are these three different base types of magic, and I think that distinction between them is crucial to scientific understanding.
Well, science doesn't really acknowledge anything but the sleight of hand magic anyway.
That might change.
It might. Things do seem to be, at least with quantum, stuff. Like I said, we're doing more and more interesting experiments. None of them are completely earth-shattering, but they're little bits of information and understanding on how this stuff works that are they're interesting, and hopefully will lead to something interesting down the road. Yeah,
I agree. I hope so too. I think that it would do humanity good in many ways, if only for humility's sake and for accuracy's sake. But I think every person is at a different level of acceptance and curiosity. So if nothing else, I don't think it hurts anything that I spell magic with a Q.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
So, where can people find you?
If anyone would like to catch up with me, you can do so on YouTube. Just search The Weird Walk Home and you'll find my channel. Aside from that, you can check out the new website that Tim Swartz has put together for all of us authors. You can email me on that website or find other articles and information bits that my co-authors and I have put up for you to enjoy. That is weirdtimebook.com. And if anyone would like to email me, my email address is talktillitome@gmail.com. Aside from that, please do keep your eyes open because I have a brand new book coming on October 1st. As well, I will be speaking at a UFO conference and panel in May of 2025. That was supposed to be in November of this year, but due to forces outside of our control, unfortunately it was moved to the spring, but that's all right. I'd love to see you there.
Can you say anything more about that, like where it is, what it is?
Absolutely. It will be in New York City, and it is technically it's a UFO disclosure conference.
Okay.
I'm going to be there, however, talking about quantum mastery and different types of peoples and the relationships between different sciences, humanity, and non-humanity.
Okay, cool. Yeah, do you want to, can you talk about what your next book is about?
Sure. This is going to be a paranormal fiction collection. You'll go around the calendar with the cast of characters, some of them human, some of them completely non-human, and then maybe some of them somewhere in between. You'll learn about different conundrums from different points of view, and there's a nice philosophical twist at the end that I have a feeling some of your listeners will really appreciate. Who's the bad guy? Who's the good guy? That's up to you to decide.
Nice. I do like that. And the book Weird
I'll make sure to send you a copy.
The book Weird Times is available everywhere, like Amazon, stuff like that?
Well, right now it's mostly available on Amazon. You can get it in digital and physical formats, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for spending some time with me, Tillie. Always good to talk to you.
Aye, Captain. Thank you for having me. It has been such a pleasure and honor, as always, my dear.
All right. I'd like to take a moment here to thank all of my Patreons for their support. Without you, this show would not be possible. And I want to give a shout out to those of you pledging $10 or more. Greg Ross, John Blackburn, Madeline J., Matt in Delaware, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, Tim, Andrew Nichols, Matthew Sproul, Marthartha, Midnight Review Presents, Christine, a blue second-gen MR2 drifting around a Japanese mountain, Patricia Giaquinta, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Andrew Malone, Ann Witowski, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Illuminati, Bright Rectangle, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, Land of the Crazy and Communicable, CJ, Corey Nelson, Craig Parmenter, Diane B., MTK, Eric Citron, Eric Todd, History and Coffee, J. Otto Bullitt, Jack Huntington, James Lindsay, Jim and Sophie, John Mattingly, John Bracken, John Hewling, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Schreck, Cool Kitty, Kristen L., Laser Printer Jam, Lauren McLean, Linda, Linz Jackson K., MJ Armstrong, Mark Brady, Matthew Brown, Sasha McHale, No One, Oli Andre Olar, Paul Jeffries, Perry Peters, Philosopher of Mirrors, Riker and Stark, Roland Belstadt, Ron Dupre, Sam Sharon, Sarah Horgan, Schmooples, Devourer of Mortal Souls, Stacy Sherwood, Stevie Norman, Strange Stories with the Seeker and Skeptic Podcast, Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, The Esoteric Book Club Podcast, Thunderboy, Tyler Glimstead, Varosh K., Victoria, Vincent Trewell, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, Ren Collier, Annabelle Smith, Caroline Walker, TDT Skunkworks, Colin Karras, and Craig Sagastumi. Thank you all so very much for the support. There is not a Patreon segment to go with this conversation with Tillie. However, there will be a Patreon segment put up for this week, and that was Barbara Fisher, her husband Zach, and I going to the Willard Graveyard and taking a walk and having a conversation about all the stuff up there and other experiences and things like that. Very off-the-cuff conversation out at a very spooky graveyard. Very nice graveyard. I mean, it's a potter's field, but it's a very nice vibe to it, as they observed as well. So that'll be the Patreon content for later this week. And if you want to become a patron, it helps us out immensely. $3 a month is all it is. I've never raised it. And it's wheredidtheroadgo.com. Just click on the big Patreon link. All right. Also, again, brand new website, thanks to Mr. John Tudor. And some really cool stuff there. And I'll be adding some other cool stuff as we go along. You can search for any show now. The search engine works way better than it did on the previous site. And so if you want to find something, just pop it in there. You should be able to find shows fairly easily. Every show is up back to the very first one in January of 2013. I'll see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.